Here are the headlines for this edition of Primetime News. South Korean Prime Minister Wan-koo warns the Japanese government it will face grim historical judgment if it continues its misguided claims to Korea's Dokdo Island. Korea's central bank has cut its growth outlook for 2015, a sign that the economic recovery is still slow. And with the confirmation that Pyongyang fired 2 KN-06 missiles on Tuesday, there's a chance that the U.S. could raise the topic of THAAD deployment during its defense chief's visit to Seoul. These stories and more coming up. It's 10 p.m. on a Thursday here in Korea, coming to you from our studio in Seoul. I'm Daniel Choy.
And I'm Hwang Ji-hye. Welcome to Primetime News.
We start off with the Korean Prime Minister's strong condemnation of Japan. He warned the country to stop distorting history or else it will face dire consequences.
And this after the recent discovery that Tokyo has been using a name based on a false historical theory to describe Korean cultural artifacts. Our Chae-san has our top story.
At an unscheduled meeting with reporters on Thursday, Prime Minister Wan-koo warned Tokyo it cannot conceal the truth about history and Japan will eventually face a stern assessment of its past. He added Korea and Japan will have to approach the history issue based on objective truth for the future of bilateral relations.
Korea and Japan should cooperate when it comes to security and the economy. Our relations should be sound. But there cannot be a distortion of history, and under no circumstances will Korea accept it.
This comes as Japan's State Cultural Agency, as well as school history texts, were found to use the name Mimana, pronounced Imna in Korean, when referring to Korean cultural properties. It is the name of a military outpost that's part of a disputed Japanese theory that Japan ruled over the southern part of Korea between the 4th and 6th centuries. Referring to Korea and Japan's agreement in 2010 to stop using the name after concluding the theory was incorrect, the Prime Minister deflected the criticism that Seoul is not doing enough to correct the issue on the diplomatic front.
I don't agree with the criticism about low-key diplomacy. We are doing the best we can within a reasonable, appropriate, and strategic framework.
He also said the Education Ministry will be tasked with clarifying the truth behind the theory. Korea's Foreign Ministry, meanwhile, expressed regret over Japan's recently approved middle school textbooks containing the controversial theory and said it will soon call for a revision. Chae-san, Arirang News.
And we delve a little bit deeper into how Tokyo is strengthening its widely rejected historical claim.
That is that it ruled over Korean territory more than 1,500 years ago. Son Jung-in tells us more.
This is a website for the Agency for Cultural Affairs under Japan's Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology. The website introduces Japan's cultural heritage, including a gold crown, a sword decorated with dragon designs, and a wing-shaped crown ornament. They all date back centuries and were excavated from Changnyeongun County in Korea's southeastern Gyeongsangnam-do province during the Three Kingdoms period. The assets, however, are recorded under the excavation site of Mimana or Imna in Korean. The name comes from the theory of Imna by Japanese scholars. They claim Japan established a military outpost in the southern part of the Korean peninsula and ruled over the territory known then as the Confederacy of Kaya from the end of the 4th to the 6th century. The theory is rejected by the vast majority of Japanese historians due to the lack of evidence, but the claim is stated in most of the middle school history textbooks that were recently approved by the Japanese government as a widely accepted theory. In another similar move, some books by right-wing publishers even include unfounded claims that the Japanese Yamato imperial court controlled the ancient Korean kingdoms of Baekje and Silla in the late 4th century, which enabled the ironware culture of Korea to flourish. From modern to ancient history, Japan's distortion of the past has become more conspicuous and persistent, dealing another blow to already frayed relations between Seoul and Tokyo at a time when there are mounting calls for better cultural and economic ties. 손정인, Arirang News.
And senior diplomats from South Korea, the United States, and Japan are set to meet in Washington sometime next week. A high-ranking South Korean government official told reporters in Washington on Wednesday that a wide range of issues will be discussed, including North Korea's nuclear program and improving ties between Seoul and Tokyo. The trilateral meeting involves South Korean Vice Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yong and his U.S. and Japanese counterparts Tony Blinken and Akitaka Saiki.
U.S. Defense Chief Ashton arrived in South Korea on Thursday. He said the goal of his trip is to reinforce deterrence against North Korea. But just ahead of his arrival, there was news Pyongyang had fired 2 short-range missiles off its west coast earlier in the week. Our Na Young has this story.
South Korea's defense ministry says North Korea fired 2 KN-06 surface-to-air missiles into the West Sea on Tuesday. This was confirmed at a regular press briefing 2 days later on Thursday. The ministry's spokesman Kim Min-seok explained the press was not notified right away because the missiles' range is not very long, making them relatively non-threatening. Kim added that the North fires these types of missiles on occasion and that the South Korean military is keeping a close eye on the matter. The news broke a few hours before U.S. Defense Chief Ashton left Japan for Korea on Thursday. When asked about the test firing, Carter reportedly said this was fresh evidence of how dangerous things are and stressed the importance of the region's strong alliance with American forces. His visit to Japan and Korea this week is his first since becoming Defense Secretary in February. Before embarking on the trip, he had made it clear that the goal of the trip was to reinforce deterrence against North Korean provocations and strengthen trilateral military cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo. But local media outlets here in Korea are watching to see whether South Korea and the U.S. will discuss the possible deployment to the Korean peninsula of its THAAD anti-ballistic missile system, also known as Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. Carter will meet with South Korean Defense Minister Han Min-gu on Friday before leaving for Hawaii on Saturday. Na Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
South Korea has reiterated that North Korea needs to engage in dialogue to resolve the issue of a unilateral wage increase by North Korea at the Inter-Korean Industrial Complex in Kaesong. The Unification Ministry said Thursday the North needs to understand the severity of the move, which violates a previous agreement saying the two Koreas would set wages together, adding the move is putting pressure on South Korean firms. Earlier this week, officials from the two Koreas exchanged and confirmed their differences on the matter, but failed to reach an agreement. The North decided to raise wages by more than 5% to $74 per month starting in March for about 53,000 North Korean workers hired by South Korean firms. And North Korea held its first major parliamentary meeting of the year earlier today. The third session of the 13th Supreme People's Assembly brought together hundreds of representatives from the regime to discuss budget issues and legislative affairs. The North has been expected to unveil legislation on a new economic policy aimed at improving the livelihoods of the North Korean people. The details on the policy are still emerging. However, we do know that Kim Jong-un did not attend the session. The young leader also missed the previous session in September 2014 when he was believed to be recovering from ankle surgery.
In his maiden National Assembly address as leader of Korea's main opposition party, Moon Jae-in urged the government to aim for a fair distribution of wealth so that Korea can overcome current economic hardships. Park Ji-won tells more.
Addressing the National Assembly for the first time since taking the helm of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy in February, party leader Moon Jae-in criticized the current administration's economic policies. He said the ruling Saenuri Party's policy of favoring conglomerates and the rich is not a remedy for the country's current economic hardships, including income polarization, a record-high youth unemployment rate, and the highest senior citizen suicide rate in the OECD. The party leader suggested that Korea aim for a fair and just distribution of wealth to overcome such problems.
Korea needs to focus on supporting ordinary citizens and strengthening the middle class by ending income and taxation inequality.
He said those in the top 10% income bracket had about 45% of the nation's total income in 2012. He said Korea's growth has been limited due to the wealth gap and urged the government to focus on increasing the earnings of those in the low and middle income bracket, which he said is key to reviving the economy. On the issue of follow-up measures in the wake of the Seoul ferry disaster that killed some 300 people about a year ago, he urged the government to retract enforcement ordinances of a special law about the tragedy. The victims' families claim that the ordinances are standing in the way of an independent investigation into the tragedy. On plans to reform the nation's debt-ridden civil servant pension program, he reiterated his party's position that a compromise among interested parties is more important than sticking to a deadline for negotiations. He also stressed the importance of closer inter-Korea relations.
Inter-Korean economic cooperation is a unique economic policy that only South Korea can pursue.
Under the National Assembly law, the leaders or floor leaders of the main political parties can address the full assembly up to 3 times a year. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, Korea's central bank cuts this year's growth outlook for the domestic economy, citing the sluggish pace of recovery, but it held the key rate steady, saying it's sufficient to support growth. Our Shin Se-min has the details.
The Bank of Korea has cut its growth outlook for the Korean economy this year by 0.3 percentage points to barely over 3%. Central Bank Governor Lee Ju-yeol said that the downgrade is due to weak exports and slow growth.
The lowered forecast comes from a weaker than expected GDP in the last quarter of 2014 and lower consumer price growth in the first quarter of this year.
The central bank also slashed its inflation forecast for this year to less than 1%, from 1.9% in January, with low global oil prices that are expected to fall even further. The central bank governor said that so far, the domestic economy has shown few signs of improvement, but maintained that consumer sentiment has not yet recovered. But the central bank left its key rate unchanged at 1.75%, saying that the current rate is low enough to prop up economic growth. Some experts, however, say that there is room for the BOK to do more.
The current rate is not low enough to boost the domestic economy. The central bank should take action by lowering it even more if the actual growth rate fails to meet the bank's outlook.
But not everyone agrees. Some experts say that the economic recovery can't be driven by the interest rate alone, and long-term structural reforms are also needed to stimulate the domestic spending and investment. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Another creative economy center has opened, this time in Korea's southeast, the country's traditional manufacturing hub. The government hopes the new center will modernize Korea's machinery and desalination industries. Our Song Ji-sun has the details.
The 9th addition to Korea's chain of creative economy innovation centers has opened in the country's southeastern Gyeongsangnam-do province. The area is Korea's traditional manufacturing hub, accounting for a quarter of the nation's total machinery exports. The government wants to transform traditional factories into smart factories that are equipped with automated and remote controllable systems as a way of combining machinery and ICT.
지금 세계 제조업은 기계공학과 전자공학의 융합이라는 메카트로니스 혁명을 맞이하고 있습니다. 세계적인 ICT 기술과 강력한 제조업 기반을 가지고 있는 우리가 업종 간 창의적인 융합을 이루어낸다면 모두가 깜짝 놀랄 새로운 부가가치를 창출해낼 수 있을 것입니다.
The center will also seek to foster the water industry into a future growth engine. In line with the initiative's goal of having large companies help smaller firms turn their ideas into businesses, this center will be run by Tusan Heavy Industries and Construction, a world leader in the seawater desalination sector with over $1 billion in annual exports. But in order for these centers to function as startup support hubs, experts say they should be closely monitored and be attractive business propositions.
The concept of sharing large companies' know-how and technology with smaller firms is a creative idea and one that could be beneficial, but there needs to be incentives to ensure large conglomerates want to take part. There should also be measures to track a startup's progress, as they could end up merely becoming subcontractors of the larger partner.
With the launch of all 17 innovation centers set to be completed in the first half this year, the main task now is ensuring that these centers are making substantial contribution to launching startups as the country takes another step toward realizing President Park Geun-hye's drive for a creative economy. 송지선, Arirang News.
Good news to all tech heads and Galaxy loyalists who have been counting down to the release of Samsung's flagship smartphone.
The Galaxy S6 hits shelves tomorrow, and Samsung says it offers chic design features and new mobile payment system that will create new value for its customers. Connie Kim files us this report.
Samsung Electronics' highly anticipated pair of Galaxy S6 smartphones is aiming to lure consumers with sleek features and new value when it hits shelves in more than 20 countries on Friday. Shin Jong-gyun, the head of Samsung Electronics' mobile division, said that new value refers to the device's wireless charging feature and the mobile payment system, Samsung Pay, which he says will create a completely new culture. The Korean tech giant smartphone also features a chic design. The S6 has an all-metal and glass body, while the Galaxy S6 Edge takes it up a notch with a screen that bends over the edge of the device. For design-conscious consumers, Samsung also discarded its removable battery for a more sleek design. Market watchers expect the new Galaxy S6 series to achieve record sales.
40 million Galaxy S5s and 46 million Galaxy S4s were sold in the first year after their release. We are expecting sales of around 55 million Galaxy S6s, especially with the unique design, considering that there will be no competing smartphones in the first half of the year. There will be demand for such high-end devices.
Samsung sold 73 million smartphones in the fourth quarter last year, while Apple sold nearly 75 million iPhones. Samsung's profit last year dropped 37% on year. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
It's time to take a look at the leading headlines from around the world with our Paul Yi.
And our focus today, the Boston bombing trial reaches a verdict. President Barack Obama defends the rights of gay youth, and China has second thoughts about its love for cars.
Let's start with our first story. Paul, in Boston, the man accused of the 2013 attack on the world-famous marathon has been found guilty by a U.S. jury. Give us the details.
Well, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was convicted of all 30 charges against him, over half of which carried the death penalty. He was also found guilty of using a weapon of mass destruction and shooting dead an officer while he was on the run from police. The 21-year-old's sentencing is expected to be held next week. The jury will decide whether he will face execution or life in prison without parole. Survivors of the incident and relatives of the victims welcomed the verdict on Wednesday, saying that justice had been served.
I'm grateful to have him off the street. I'm grateful to show everyone, the world, that it's not tolerated. This is not how we behave, and we're grateful that everybody's worked so hard to make it, known that we're not going to allow this.
The verdict comes nearly 2 years after the attack, when two bombs Tsarnaev and his brother Tamerlan planted exploded near the finish line of the race. 3 people died in the blast, one as young as 8 years old, in what has been described as the worst terror attack on American soil since 9/11. And staying in the U.S., President Barack Obama has called for an end to controversial therapy programs that seek to change the sexual orientation of gay and transgender youth. In a statement on Wednesday, the White House said that overwhelming scientific evidence showed that the so-called conversion therapies were neither medically nor ethically appropriate. The show's report falls in line with an executive order last year aimed at protecting the civil rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender citizens.
In a few moments, I will sign an executive order that does 2 things. First, the federal government already prohibits employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Once I sign this order, the same will be explicitly true for gender identity.
Latest White House statement was in response to a petition that was started after a 17-year-old transgender youth committed suicide in December. The teenager's parents had isolated her and forced her to undergo psychiatric treatment in an attempt to change her gender identity. And finally, a new study has shown that China's love affair with cars may be cooling as the country of over 240 million drivers struggles with traffic headaches and dismal air quality. A report by consulting firm Bain & Company found that 30% of surveyed Chinese urbanites said they'd be willing to give up their vehicles if traffic problems worsen. Among the complaints include massive congestion, scarce parking, and the expensive cost of fuel. Analysts say it points to a bumpy road ahead for the world's biggest auto market.
First off, the public transportation system has been improving, but there's also some other segments who has actually told us that they're interested in trying the new mobility platform, and that could be short-term car sharing, car rental or leasing, that actually allows people to get access to cars beyond taxis.
Despite the concerns, demand for automobiles in China has been soaring. According to the China Association of Automobile Manufacturers, nearly 20 million passenger vehicles were sold just last year alone. That's up from less than 1 million in annual sales back in 2001. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Well, it felt more like spring today under partly sunny skies, and there's more sunshine in the forecast for tomorrow, which should allow temperatures to make a run for nearly 20 degrees here in the capital and above 20 for some parts in the southern provinces. But that also means a huge gap in temperatures from low to high, so dress accordingly. And as for the readings for other parts of the country, Daegu and Busan will get up to 20 and 17 tomorrow afternoon under lots of sunshine. And it seems like Daejeon and Jeju Island will top out at 15 and 19, and Dokdo rises to 12. Now, the pleasant spring weather will continue till the end of the weekend, creating perfect conditions for those of you planning to head out to see some of the spring flowers. And speaking of which, the capital's two major spring flower festivals will kick off tomorrow in Yeouido and at Seokjeon Lake in Jamsil. So I hope you have a chance to check them out, but public transportation is advised if you're planning to go to either place. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Daniel Choy. We hope you'll join us again same time tomorrow. Good night or good day, depending on where you're tuning in from.